Do you believe that reindeer can fly? Neither did Anna. Then she married a reindeer wrangler and her world turned upside down. Join her as she finds her own Christmas secret to share with her new husband in a honeymoon Christmas surprise.
Some honeymoon. He's had you cleaning out stalls, didn't he? Anna Nichols cringed at the accusation in her sister's voice. We've been married 3 months. What honeymoon lasts 3 months? She fired back, feeling protective of her new husband. Abner was wonderful. Not only was he broad-chested and handsome, he was the kindest man on the planet. Brenda huffed. The honeymoon period is supposed to last the first 3 years. She spoke as if she were the authority on the matter. Perhaps she was. As the oldest of Anna's sisters, she'd been married for almost a decade. Anna tucked the receiver between her chin and ear so she could knead the bread dough while talking. What she wouldn't give for one of those speaker phones right now. There was always so much work on the ranch that she hardly had time to keep up with her friends and family, and it was Christmas. Holding the phone like this caused a cramp in her neck and made her back hurt. We cleaned stalls this morning so we could have Christmas off. Which meant they'd have double the work the day after, which was fine. They planned a romantic Christmas morning together, and she looked forward to it. I knew what I was getting into when I married him, she stage whispered while looking over her shoulder to ensure Abner didn't hear. He was supposed to be checking on the herd. They'd moved them into the closer pasture because of the storm, and they were agitated. They were also extraordinary. But she couldn't tell her sister that the reindeer could fly. And even if she did, Brenda wouldn't believe her. Anna's heart warmed at the thought of her furry friends. Dunder wasn't quite 1 year old, and already he had his sights set on Santa's sleigh. He stomped his back hooves as if they were mighty instead of spindly. Caramella was a darling. She had these big, beautiful eyes and a soft auburn coat. She knew she was lovely. She'd tried out for Santa a few months before Anna became part of the ranch. Though she didn't make it to the North Pole stables, she could pull a sleigh on her own, with style. There were others. No one can say you went into this blind. Brenda coughed delicately, her way of saying she disapproved of Anna's choices, but it wasn't her place to say so. Especially since she'd said plenty the day Anna announced her betrothal. Other than disliking the man she'd fallen head over heels for, her sister was a good person. Needing a subject change, Anna said, "Tell me about the mitten drive." Brenda gasped happily. "It's the best one ever. We have enough mittens for the whole elementary school and then some. We're going to send the extras to an orphanage in Virginia." Anna's hands stilled over the dough. "Why Virginia?" "I don't know. Robert has a connection with someone there." Robert was her brother-in-law. As a politician, he had connections everywhere. Brenda continued to talk about all the regular goings-on back home. Reindeer Wrangler Ranch seemed so very far away from her home in Wyoming, and a case of homesickness washed over her. If she'd stayed home, she would have been preparing for the Christmas Eve ball with Brenda and the rest of her family. Giving herself a good shake, she rolled the dough out and sprinkled cinnamon and sugar. Cinnamon rolls were a Christmas morning tradition back home, one she intended to keep going in her own house. The timer went off, and she glanced at the clock on the wall. Was it so late already? "Listen, Brenda," she interrupted, "the turkey needs basting. I'll have to let you go." "All right. But don't forget to call Mom tomorrow, it's Christmas." Anna rolled her eyes. As if she would forget her parents. "Of course. Love you. Kiss everyone for me." They said goodbye, and she replaced the receiver on the wall mount with a sigh. After basting the turkey and setting the rolls in the second oven, she started on the other side dishes. It would just be her and Abner for dinner, but she wanted to make it special. It was Christmas Eve, after all. They planned to read from the Bible by the fire before bed, another tradition she wanted to keep for their future family. Feeling a wave of nausea, they happened out of the blue. She dashed for the bathroom, where she tossed her cookies. If she didn't already suspect that she was expecting, she would have wondered what was wrong. Being the youngest of 4 daughters, she'd seen the signs often enough. Maybe that's why she missed her family so fiercely. Holding her stomach, she looked down and said, "Try to behave for a little longer." There was no stirring in her womb, no acknowledgement that he or she had heard her. She was a little ways away from that kind of communication. Still, she'd keep talking to the baby. This might be the only time in his or her life that Anna could get a word in edgewise. Growing up with all those sisters taught her that silence was a rare commodity. The sound of the door banging open and Abner knocking the snow off his boots had her scrambling from the bathroom and back to the kitchen. She was checking the rolls when he entered the kitchen and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Something smells good," he mumbled as he dropped his lips to her neck. "It's the turkey," she tipped her head to give him better access as she sighed into him. "I think it's you." His breath was warm on her skin, and her knees gave out. She turned in his arms and buried her fingers in his hair. She lifted on her toes and kissed him hello. "I'm such a sucker for you, Abner Nichols." His grin broke the kiss. "Stop smiling when I'm trying to kiss you," she scolded him playfully. "I can't help it." He kissed her again, chuckling. "I don't know how I talked you into marrying me." She snorted delicately. "It was the reindeer." He threw his head back and laughed. "Right. They're charmers." They were every single one of them. But the four-footed creatures had not drawn her away from Wyoming. It was Abner. He was a child at heart, the man with pure love inside of him, a love she wanted to absorb and build and then share with their children. The timer dinged, and she spun around to get the cinnamon rolls out of the oven. They were golden brown on top and swirled with cinnamon and butter. Abner began looking under lids and peeking in the oven. "Can I help you find something?" She set the rolls aside to cool slightly before drizzling the icing. "The Christmas pudding." He opened the fridge and leaned in. Anna stooped down to baste the turkey again. "Christmas pudding?" He shut the fridge. "Yes, the pudding." "Where are you storing it?" Anna stood, the baster dripping on the floor. "I didn't make a Christmas pudding." His eyes went large in surprise. "Why not?" Anna glanced around at the pots and pans steaming, bubbling, or simmering on the stove, the baster in her hand, and the pans of cinnamon and regular rolls on the island counter. "I've been a little busy, Abner." She put the baster in the large cup she used to hold, so it didn't drip on the counter and wiped her hand on her apron. "You didn't say a word about a Christmas pudding." "It's tradition." "The whole world knows that," he said, his hands on his hips. Anna lifted both eyebrows. "Do they now?" He began to pace. "We can't have Christmas without it." Anna blinked several times as tears stung the backs of her eyes. She was suddenly so tired she wanted to melt into the floor and nap until New Year's Eve. She'd cleaned stalls, fed animals, scrubbed the kitchen, baked, cooked, basted, and more, all while dodging morning sickness. Not that Abner knew about the nausea, still. "I think we'll have a wonderful first Christmas together, with or without pudding." She couldn't help the bit of frustration that had crept into her voice like that frosty breeze that seeped in around the mudroom window. Abner threw both arms in the air. "We always serve Santa Christmas pudding." Anna stared up at the ceiling, willing the tears not to fall. "I made him cookies. I think he'll be fine." Growing up, they'd put out cookies every year, and the big guy never complained. Abner pressed his lips out in a fierce pucker. His face darkened, and he spun on his heel and out the door. "Where are you going?" she called after him. "I don't want to fight with you on Christmas Eve." His voice bellowed through the house. Anna blinked. "I don't want to fight with you ever," she yelled after him. The moment the door slammed shut, her tears fell hard, hot, and fast. She swiped at them, angry at herself for feeling this way and angry at Abner for acting like Christmas was ruined because they didn't have pudding. She picked up a dish rag and threw it in the sink full of sudsy water. "It's not like he couldn't have said something," she snapped toward her stomach. Instantly feeling horrible for bad-mouthing the baby's father in front of him or her, she clamped her teeth shut and continued her rant in the quiet confines of her own mind. Christmas wasn't ruined until he got all uppity about pudding. She scrubbed harder at a wooden spoon than was necessary.
Abner stomped to the barn, holding his hand up to shield his face from the fierce winds. The snow came at him sideways, and the wind nearly knocked his feet out from under him twice. He banged through the door to the newly constructed barn and all but fell into the first stall. Prince stared at him like he'd grown antlers. Rough night. You could stay that. Abner lifted a bale of straw and hauled it to the other end of the barn. He used his pocket knife to crack it open and sprinkled it around baby Dunder's stall. He thought he heard the sound of sleigh bells and paused to listen. Nope. Must be wishful hearing, he mumbled. There. He tossed his hand toward the pile of straw. It's getting cold outside. That'll be a soft place to sleep. Dunder stared at the straw dubiously. Cold doesn't bother me. I could fly through this storm and not get cold. Abner patted the reindeer's bare head. Why don't you wait until your antlers grow in before you take on Mother Nature? Dunder shook off his hand. Just you wait. Abner half smiled at him. This little guy had a heart 10 times his size. If Abner were to put money on any first-year reindeer in the barn, it would be Dunder. If confidence alone could get you to the North Pole, you'd already be there. Dunder sniffed. Yeah, I would. Comet, a 2-year-old mellow fellow with a beautiful dark brown pelt, floated down from the ceiling. Why so glum, chum? You picked up on that. Abner thought he'd done well hiding his feelings from the reindeer. Comet continued to watch him. Waiting. There's no Christmas pudding for Santa. He exclaimed. Might as well get the bad news out first. And on top of that, I walked out on Anna because I was mad at her for not making it. Comet tisked his tongue. Bad form, old man. Who are you calling old? Abner shoved away from the wall and found a shovel. He might as well use some of his energy to keep things clean around here. Comet followed a ready listening ear. Everyone knows you make Christmas pudding. It's in the name. Dunder lifted to the ceiling and tucked his legs under him as Abner came in with the shovel. He knew the drill. Abner shoveled and tossed for a moment before his burst of anger left him and he was hollowed out. The thing is, she made all this food and it smelled so good. He rubbed his stomach. I guess if I want any of it, I'd better head back in there and apologize. Comet lowered his chin. You want my advice? Abner tilted his head, curious. Sure. Don't anger the one who feeds you. He flicked his tail for emphasis. Abner bit his cheek to keep from laughing. That's actually really smart. He rubbed Comet's neck. You're going to the North Pole one day. I believe in you. Abner tickled Comet's ear. Comet's back foot started thumping on the ground in a show of pleasure at being scratched in just the right place. Dunder laughed at him as he settled into his pile of straw for the night. Comet went over, nudged the smaller reindeer onto his side, and then tickled him with his big, wet nose. Dunder kicked, and Reindeer giggled. Abner shook his head at their antics. I know it's Christmas Eve, but you two need to stop reindeer games by 10, okay? Comet and Dunder gave him the same innocently confused look. Reindeer can't tell time, Comet said. Abner refused to get into an argument with them. Instead, he shoved his stocking hat, lovingly knitted by his wonderful new bride, low on his head and charged into the storm.
Anna stared into the snow. She had a good idea where her husband was since the barn was lit up like New York City. She could not blame him for heading out there when he was upset. The reindeer had a magical way about them that brought joy to your heart, whether you wanted it or not. Who wouldn't want it? That was her question when Abner had first introduced her to the herd. She hadn't lied, she was deeply in love with Abner when she married him and moved in. A long-distance relationship had been difficult, which is why they made it a short one. Marrying a man she'd met at a ranch convention and then wrote letters to and exchanged phone calls with on Sunday nights seemed foolhardy to her friends and family. They didn't know Abner, not as she did. His letters were surprisingly tender. She'd kept every one of them. They rested in her nightstand, wrapped in a red silk ribbon. Hers were in his desk drawer adorned with a green ribbon. They'd chosen Christmas colors, which was sweet. Maybe it was because she was the youngest, but Anna hadn't ever given up her love of all things Christmas and Santa. She adored Christmas Eve in church. The hymns. The nativity set on the lawn. Earlier tonight, she and Abner had taken a reindeer-drawn sleigh into town to attend services, and she'd felt so peaceful thinking about the babe in Bethlehem. Where was all that peace now? It wasn't in the weather, she could tell that. The wind howled, and the snow picked up speed, swirling past the window like a snow globe gone mad. The night was dark and cold, and she was all alone. Some Christmas Eve. Sighing heavily, she turned away from the window and let the curtain drop. The sound of sleigh bells filled the air and then grew quiet. Anna dashed back to the window and threw aside the fabric. On her front lawn was a large red sleigh and 8 beautiful reindeer. She gasped in delight. The little girl inside of her danced and giggled with glee. Santa, she whispered. A moment later, the jolly elf stood before her fireplace, brushing the snow off his suit. Ho ho ho. He looked around the room for a moment, taking in the tree and the matching cream-colored stockings with fur tops that she'd lovingly knitted for her and Abner. When his eyes fell on her, Anna sucked in a breath. "You're not old," she challenged. He had laugh lines around his eyes, but no other wrinkles. His beard and hair were white, but not wiry like an older man's. He grabbed his stomach and let out a hearty ho 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 once again. "I'm older than you, Anna." The way he said her name, like he knew she was a good person and appreciated that goodness, made her smile and feel warm and buttery inside, like the best hug from an old friend. Some of the loneliness she hadn't known she was struggling with melted away. His eyes softened. "I should have brought Gail. She would love to meet you." "Gail?" Anna asked. "My wife. She has her hands full with Robin, who won't stay out of the kitchens, and our baby, Lux, but she'd like a friend. Someone who knows about all this." He motioned to his suit. Anna lit up inside. To have a friend she could speak freely with, someone to share the antics of the reindeer without having to censor herself would be a wonderful gift. "I'd like that. So much." He nodded once. "We'll come before the new year. I'll make dinner." Visions of lasagna and freshly made garlic bread came to her mind. Her stomach revolted, and she had to breathe deeply through her nose. Santa stepped forward. "Have a seat." He reached into his sack and pulled out a rocking chair. Anna laughed out loud as it appeared. "That's a remarkable bag." He patted it. "Never leave home without my magical bag." He looked closer at her, and she could almost hear the wheels turning in his head. "Well, we might just." He pulled out a second rocking chair and set it by the fire. "That's a mite bit better." The back door banged open, and a gust of cold air made the fire sputter. "Harvey," called Abner from the doorway, "you have a reindeer problem." Santa touched his hat. "If you'll excuse me?" He paused mid-step. "Take it easy for a few minutes." "Okay?" She nodded. Running her hands along the arms of the wooden rocking chair, she marveled at how comfortable it was. With the fire warming her, she drifted off into a peaceful sleep.
Abner stood next to the sleigh, where Linus breathed heavily. "You're not okay, are you?" He touched the black pelt that was wet from exhaustion. None of the other reindeer were panting, and none had sweat marks around their harnesses though, by the end of the night, they would all be worn out. Linus had a large rack of antlers even, though he should have shed them months ago. Tucking his thumb inside the reindeer's ear, he felt for his temperature. It was burning up. Abner began unharnessing him and was soon joined by his lifelong friend, Harvey Kringle. Linus lifted large, heavy eyes. "I can make it, Santa." "I know you could." Harvey touched Linus's jaw, lifting his head a little more to make eye contact. "You are the mightiest reindeer I've ever flown with, Linus." Linus glanced down. "I'm sorry." Abner's heart went out to the guy. "You're a little under the weather. That's nothing to be sorry about. We'll get you in with the doc first thing in the morning, and he'll have you ride as Rain in no time." They began walking Linus to the barn. The other reindeer dropped their heads and bowed in honor. No one wanted to say it, but this was Linus's last flight with the Elite Eight. Even if he made it back to the North Pole, he wouldn't be asked to do the long haul again. "I have some antibiotics inside," Abner told Harvey. Harvey gave him a look, and Abner nodded in response. There was another problem they had to solve. 7 reindeer could not pull Santa's sleigh. "I've got a solution for that, too," Abner assured him. They took a moment to settle Linus in a quarantine stall. This one had a roof on the top to prevent the reindeer from socializing, just in case Linus had a virus. It was unlikely, considering the reindeer at the North Pole didn't leave often, but it wasn't unheard of either. Dunder stood on top of Linus's stall and tried to see inside. "Who's here?" "Who's asking?" replied Linus. "Only one of my best," said Harvey. Dunder tripped in midair. Santa Harvey ho ho hoed, and suddenly every reindeer head popped over the stall doors. Abner laughed. "Come on out and look at him." He waved for them to join Santa. Harvey looked them all over as they greeted him. A Santa sighting wasn't uncommon around here, but reindeer were overly curious about the big man and extremely loyal. Abner made his way around the group to Comet. He nudged him. "How do you feel about flying tonight?" he asked the reindeer quietly. His relaxed personality would pair well with Glory, who tended to be high maintenance and full of drama. Linus's experience had done her well, but Comet's calm would balance her. Like Anna and him. Anna was an anchor. She'd worked hard to make their first Christmas special, spending hours in the kitchen. And he'd gone all drama over a Christmas pudding. Comet nodded. Put me in, coach. Harvey entertained the other reindeer while Abner snuck out the door with Comet. He introduced the reindeer who would stand and fly side by side. Glory was all aflutter at the new, well-toned male. Comet did his best to ignore her flirtations and focus on being professional. Abner loved every minute of it and made a mental note to check in on Comet in a week or so. He might need a break from all the attention. The wind had calmed down and the snow fell in large clumps. Harvey shut the barn door behind him and joined Abner at the sleigh. Here. Merry Christmas. He handed Abner a gift out of his magical sack. Open it with Anna. I will. Abner tucked the box under his arm. Merry Christmas. He patted Comet. You'll do great. Remember, I believe in you. Comet's shaking tail stopped and he bumped Abner's hand. Thank you for everything. Abner's throat tightened with emotion. This was the most challenging part of his job. On Dasher. On Prancer. On Comet. Called Santa, and the reindeer strained against their harnesses. The sleigh moved forward and then lifted into the air. Abner waved as Harvey and the sleigh were swallowed by the storm. The bells jingled and then they, too, were gone. Abner made his way inside, kicking the snow off his boots. He found Anna asleep in a rocking chair. The Nicholas crest had been carved into the back and there was a matching one for him. He knelt beside the chair and nudged Anna. Sweetheart. She came to, slowly, moving like a cat waking from a good nap. Her eyes rested on him and she blinked several times. I'm sorry, honey. About not fighting with you, he said. She half smiled. You might want to rephrase that, she teased. He brushed her hair off her cheek. I met Santa, she said softly. He's younger than I pictured. She yawned. Abner laughed. I don't think he hears that often. She smiled easily. Are you still upset? He shook his head. I realized it wasn't the pudding that I missed. It was my dad. He made it every year. Anna's face softened and she cupped his cheek. He'd be so proud of you. He swallowed heavily. I know it's hard for you living out here away from people. But I'm so grateful not to be alone anymore. Her eyes glistened in the firelight. I love you, Abner Nicholas. I love you, Anna Nicholas. He kissed her palm. What do you have there? She nodded to the package tucked under his arm. He pulled it out, revealing the bright red wrapping paper and the tag that read. From Santa. We're supposed to open it together. Anna grinned. I guess opening one present on Christmas Eve couldn't hurt. Abner smiled back, kissing her soft lips. I think we just started another tradition. Here's to many more to come. She kissed him back. Together they tore open the gift to find two stockings, one red and one green. They had matching fur trim to the one she'd knitted. Abner's face fell. We already have stockings. He lifted one out and it made a noise. Reaching inside, he pulled out a baby rattle. What in the world? Anna laughed. Santa is not subtle. She held up the other and it made the same sound. But why are there two? Why is there one? Abner countered. Anna bit her lower lip. Abner. Their eyes met. I have another gift for you, but it won't arrive until summer. She placed her hand over her belly and smiled softly. Abner's eyes grew large. You mean you? We? Yes. Anna threw her arms around his neck. We're going to have a baby. Abner was silent, staring at the stocking in his hand even as he hugged his bride. Anna. She pulled back to look at him. Yes. I think we might have two. He held up his stocking and then lifted her hand that held the other. Anna gasped. No. She looked frantically at the rocking chairs. He couldn't possibly know that. Could he? Abner shrugged. What did the doctor say? She placed both hands on her cheeks. I couldn't get into him because of the holiday. My first appointment is next week. Abner laughed. You'll be the first woman to tell him to look for 2 heartbeats. She put her hands on her hips. You bet I will. Abner hugged her close. What do you say to a Christmas Eve picnic in front of the fireplace? I'll bring everything in here while you rest. She melted. I'd love that. He kissed her cheek and then made good on his promise. As they ate in front of the fire, he decided they might have come up with another tradition. Who knew what else they would create together?
Christmas morning dawned on a snowstorm that wouldn't quit. Anna and Abner made their way to the living room, which was stuffed with gifts. Santa had come back when they were sleeping to deliver a new stand mixer with a bread kneading attachment, a speakerphone, and more. He'd eaten the cookies Anna left out for him, which gave her a sense of pride, though she silently promised to make a Christmas pudding next year for Abner in honor of his father, who had tended Reindeer Wrangler Ranch as a widow for decades. Anna wished she'd had the chance to meet him. She and Abner donned their winter clothing and headed to feed the animals. She drove the truck through the field as Abner stood in the back and threw the grass hay to the reindeer. These reindeer couldn't fly, though they had enough personality to make up for it. Abner told her about the sick reindeer last night, and she was anxious for him. They made their way to the barn next. Inside, they found Dunder sleeping in front of Linus's stall. Linus got to his feet. He looked worn out but healthy. He wandered to the door and glanced down at Dunder. "He's a good kid." "He could use a mentor," said Abner as he rubbed his thumb along the underside of Linus's ear and felt his temperature. He'd taught Anna that trick, and she'd used it when caring for the young ones. Someone to show him the ropes. "He's going to be something, but don't tell him that." Linus nodded. "He'll be powerful. Maybe the most powerful out of all of us." He looked down the row of stalls. The reindeer lounged in their straw this morning. Anna stepped forward with a bucket of oats. "Hungry?" she asked. Linus cocked his head at her. "You're new." She dumped the oats into his feeder. "I am." Linus lifted what would have been an eyebrow. "You planning to stick around?" Anna nodded. "I am. I think I'll liven things up around here." She patted her tummy with meaning. "What do you think?" Linus stomped his front hoofs. "It's about time." He trumpeted a call that shook the rafters. Anna reached for Abner. "Now you've done it," he teased. Soon, the reindeer were bounding in circles above their heads, sounding a joyous noise. Caramella flipped backward, twice. "What are they doing?" she asked. Abner's eyes filled with unshed tears. "They're celebrating." He looked at her. "They're celebrating our family and our babies." He laughed as Dunder scrambled to his feet, awakened by the ruckus. Reindeer love children. Dunder bumped Anna's leg. "You're having a baby?" His whole body shook with excitement. Anna leaned down and whispered in his ear. "I'm having two." Dunder reeled back, slipping and then recovering quickly. He spun in a circle chasing his tail and making Anna laugh. Abner wrapped his arms around her from behind and kissed her cheek as they watched the reindeer celebration. "Merry Christmas, my love." Anna looked around them. Christmas wasn't just one day out of the year on the Reindeer Wrangler Ranch. It was every day. This was where she wanted to raise her children. Heaven help her, she was having twins. Twins and hopefully many more after that. "Merry Christmas, Abner." She turned in his arms and gave him a Christmas kiss for the ages.
Hi, Merry Christmas. As I've been experimenting with the AI technology, I'm interested to see what you thought of having the dual voices. So trading off for the male POV versus the female POV and having the different voices there. Let me know what you think in the comments and have a very wonderful Christmas. Don't forget to subscribe and I'll see you on the next video.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this fun Santa romance story. For more holiday cheer or contemporary romance audiobooks, click the subscribe button and check out my channel. If you'd like to listen ad-free, you can find me on Patreon in the link below. If you'd like to see my full library, look for Lucy McConnell wherever ebooks are sold. And watch for more Reindeer Wrangler audiobooks coming soon. Have a very Merry Christmas.